Where has May gone? That's my big question for all of you. Welcome in everyone, welcome to my May reading wrap up. If this is your first time seeing one of my videos, welcome in, my name's Charlotte. I do mainly vlogging, but I do a little bit of bookish content on the side. And if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. It is time for the May reading wrap up. I posted my April one quite late, which is probably why it feels like the month has gone really quick for me. I'm finally out of my reading slump. I had a really good month of reading in May. I'm really pleased with the books I read. April was a bit of a struggle for me. I feel like I was just making some not very good book choices. If this is your first time seeing one of my videos, I do these monthly reading wrap-ups. I don't have a reading target for the year, but you can go back through my previous videos and see them. I've been doing them for about 2 or 3 years now. There'll be a 2025 book playlist on my YouTube page if you want to go have a look. We're halfway through the year, so I'll give you a bit of context if this is your first time seeing one of my videos. So I tend to do these videos spoiler-free. I'll only ever really give you as much information as you can kind of find out from looking at the book online or reading the back of the book. So some of them are a bit vague. If I do need to spoil it, I'll always give you ample time to get away and I'll timestamp the video for spoilers and things like that. So never fear, I'm just kind of covering these books as vaguely as I can while giving you all a thorough review. I do read a lot of different genres, I like to think. I've been trying to expand my reading horizons a little bit this year and read a bit more variety and also work my way through my physical TBR, which is very big. In the month of May, I read 5 books. 2 were physical and 3 were digital, I think. I don't think I did any audiobooks this month, did I? Let's have a look. No, I'm right. Like I said, I feel really pleased this month with the books I read and how much I enjoyed them. So let's get into it. I always say this, but it's because I don't want to seem rude, but I have my laptop off to the side with like a summary of my thoughts to make sure I don't miss anything. So if you see me glancing down, that will be why. The first book I read in May was a physical book and it was Conclave by Robert Harris. This is a fiction book, and if it's sounding familiar, it's because it has just recently been made into a film this year. So I always start out with a little synopsis of the books as best as I can, just to give you a bit of context. The Pope has died. Behind the locked doors of the Sistine Chapel, 118 cardinals are meeting to cast their votes in conclave in the world's most secretive election. Over the next 72 hours, one of these 118 men will become arguably the most spiritual figure on earth. Now, these 118 cardinals are holy men, but they are also just men, and they are ambitious men at that. So this feels very apt to read, as I literally was reading this as conclave was taking place in the real world in real time. So it felt like quite an immersive experience for me. This got me out of my reading slump, and I'm very delighted to report that this is a 5-star read for me. Now, if you've watched my channel for a while, you might already know this, but I don't do star ratings on books anymore. I feel like I get too bogged down in the star rating. I feel like it's not fair. Obviously, my rating kind of changes throughout the year with like the relativity of all the books I read, but I do always rate things as a 5-star if they are a 5-star read for me, because I think it's really important to acknowledge the good ones. And obviously on my story graph, I do give things like star ratings, but I just think take those with a pinch of salt. But you can see my 5-star reads on my story graph. I'll put the link in the description box for you as always. But yeah, this was a 5-star read for me and it really got me out of my reading slump. So really pleased about that. I wanted to read this before I watched the film. I actually had no intention of watching the film, and then I read this and thought it would be a good thing to do. So I'll get onto that a little bit further in the review of my thoughts. So we are dropped into this book right at the start where Lamelli, who's our main character, has literally just found out the Pope has died. He's called to the bedside and we find out the Holy Father is dead. So we literally follow Lamelli as he is tasked with facilitating conclave and like the next steps after the Holy Father dies. So we follow him during this facilitation and also during the investigations that result as a symptom of corruption in the church, and also his struggles with his faith, which I think is really interesting to me. Although the intro and the start of the book feels very speedy and it feels very fast paced, I would actually say that the pace of the book overall is quite slow. I think as is the content, you know, like it is a much more character driven book despite the fact that the main plot driver is the Pope dying. Even though it's very slow paced, I do think it's written in such an incredibly compelling way. I'm not religious anymore. You may not know that about me, but I was raised religiously, went to a Catholic school, communion, church every Sunday, Sunday school, that whole thing. I have like obviously complex feelings about religion and stuff now, but I'm inherently like a very spiritual person and I believe in faith, just to like blanket it, but it's much more complex than that. But I do find myself really drawn to stories with religious themes, religious overtones. I find religion really interesting as a subject. Like I love learning about all the different religions. I find human relation to religion religion and faith very interesting as well. Like, I don't know if it's like the anthropologicalness of it, but it's not a real word, but you know what I mean? Like, I find that relationship between human and person and religion and faith all very, very interesting. The philosophical debate of it all, I guess. So I think what I loved about this is like the attention to detail of the location, the intricacy of the process of Conclave, the structure of the church, the Vatican, which I didn't really know a lot about. And I think Conclave is historically a very secretive turn of events. There is a lot of process that goes into it that the public aren't really privy to. And it's very, very clear that the author has done some serious research into how this runs and how it works. And my theory that the author had done a lot of research was backed in the acknowledgement section of the book. So it's really interesting to read, actually. I don't always read the acknowledgements, especially if they open with like personal thanks and things like that, which is really bad of me. But they did ask the Vatican for permission to visit the locations used during a conclave, and they are usually not permitted for the public to be in. So yeah, they conducted a lot of interviews. I just thought that level of research is really reflected in how detailed the book is, and I love a bit of research. I can always appreciate a well-researched book. In terms of characters, I really enjoyed the like slow, steady unraveling as we learn about the primary cardinals that are main characters in this book and their nuances. We're kind of breadcrumbed these bits of information about each cardinal in such a clever way, and breadcrumbed positively, not in a way that feels frustrating. It layers and builds attention in a way that feels appropriate to the book, especially one that is like more character driven. It just feels well layered and very well constructed. I got a really good sense of who Lamelli is as a person. That's our main character, not only from his narration, but the way that you see the other characters interact with him throughout the book. You get this sense that he is this kind of paragon of neutrality and fairness and justice. He's a very measured man. He's a good man. He's unambitious, but he does also struggle with his faith, even though his whole life has been based around his religion. My favourite moments is the kind of slip we see in his usually unambitious character, and it casts him in a light that, like, even though he is a spiritual leader and a spiritual figure, he is only human. And I don't think we actually get a very good sense of that reflected in the film. I personally thought the film moves way too quickly. This book is like a slow pace, even though it's not very long, but we don't get as much of the intrigue from the characters. Overall, I really didn't expect to like this. If you'd have told me that I would be rating a book 5 stars that's about stuffy old white men in the Vatican, I would probably laugh at you. I'd be like, yeah, that's not really my thing. But genuinely, this feels well written. It feels intricate. It feels detailed and well researched. And my enjoyment of that is one of the reasons it gets a 5 stars. This was a page turner for me. I couldn't really put it down. I was really excited to read it, and I haven't been excited to read anything in a long time, especially after like a shoddy month of reading in April. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Conclave. I've been wearing this headband all day. It's giving me a wee headache, just, you know, around the ears. So my next book of the month was a Kindle read. It was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and this is a sci-fi book. Our main character, Ryland Grace, wakes up in deep space on a spaceship by himself with no memory and only 2 corpses for company. These are the corpses of his former crewmates. He's the sole survivor on a desperate last-ditch space mission to save Earth, and also has no idea how long he's been asleep for. He can barely remember his own name, and now it's on him to piece together what fragmented memories he has got to figure out how he is going to save humankind. Another banger. We are so back, girls. This has been on my TBR for yonks, and when I posted on my Instagram story that I was reading it, I had so many messages. This is one of those books I always get recommendations for as well. So many of you have said you'll really enjoy this, especially after I read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and I really liked that as well. I feel like those two are like the most recommended sci-fi books that I get all the time, and I finally thought, you know what, I'm gonna bite the bullet because it keeps showing up on my Kindle. It just kept showing up. I kept seeing it in the library, kept seeing it in the bookshop, and the only reason I didn't buy a physical copy was because I didn't like the covers that I was seeing. I'm trying to be a bit more discerning with buying physical books and only buying covers I love. So glad I read it. I really, really liked this book, and honestly, even though like I knew what it was about, there was several points where I was like, I don't know where this is going. I don't know what kind of sci-fi this is going to be. And I was genuinely surprised at several points the turn that it was taking. About a third of the way through, I was like, wait, I couldn't have put money on this, that this is where it's going to go. I think because I'm quite a new reader to the sci-fi genre, I don't read loads of sci-fi. I find it quite difficult. But I was like, oh, okay, damn, like, I get it. I will say that it wasn't a perfect 5-star for me, but it was very, very close. And honestly, if I'm gonna put my critical hat on for like just 2 seconds, looking back and some of the thoughts I was having while I was reading, I don't think at times the writing or the characterization was like perfect, or it wasn't that good. Some moments were worse than others. And I had so much fun reading it that I can overlook those moments, you know? It wasn't like a do or die for me with some of those moments of what I felt was bad writing or that were just like a bit, One thing about me is I'm a real sucker for the goodness of human spirit clubbing together against insurmountable odds. Like, I love that shit. I eat it up. And I'm not gonna lie, initially when I cracked this open, I had such a terrible sense of dread reading this. You know, when you just constantly think something awful is gonna happen. The first night I read it, I actually, I couldn't sleep because I kept having nightmares about global warming and I was worrying all night about global warming. My first 100 pages weren't very enjoyable. This, but that actually often happens to me when I read sci-fi, which is probably why I don't read it so much. And that feeling was quickly resolved because I started actually enjoying the read. I really enjoyed the sciencey angle of it. I'm dead into science and physics and stuff like that. I really enjoy it being woven into my books. That made it a really captivating read for me. And I will say the dual timeline that we get, so there's kind of like an element of present day versus flashbacks, like being on the spaceship versus his life before as his memories return. That was actually a really nice reprieve from the science a lot of the time. It was a nice balm because at points I do think it got too science dense. And I'm saying that as someone that like really enjoys reading about science. It felt a bit like science for science sake. And I know it sounds silly because it's a science fantasy book, but you know, when it's like the level of science is quite high, so everything is explained to the reader, so it feels like you're just constantly getting this barrage of sciencey information. That's not me complaining as well. That's not a critique on the book. It is just some of those paragraphs got a bit dense. I think if you're not super clocked into reading it, it can feel like a wall of physics stuff that you don't quite understand. And I will say about halfway through, it started getting so dense in the science that it was getting a bit boring and repetitive. And I say that like so lightly. I don't mean like hugely boring and repetitive. I'm also very conscious this is a lot of your favorite books, so I don't want to be like scathing about it. I'm not being scathing at all. I'm being very complimentary of the book. But yeah, that was just something that I was like, I was like slogging through it like about halfway through, like, come on, like, is this going to be the tone for the rest of the book? It just got a smidge repetitive. I say that with all the love in the world because I did really enjoy reading it despite that. Now it sounds like I'm just talking bad about the whole book, but I also think the wacky, like comical, nerdy science guyness of Grace's character got a bit tiring. But then again, I was feeling this way during the science heavy middle portion of the book. So I think my patience was getting a bit lower. I did get back into it. And like I said, those things that I initially found a bit annoying about his character were quickly tempered by like my renewed interest and enjoyment of the book. I really, really love a friendship in a book. I really, really loved Rocky. I was a bit frightened at first, but I really loved Rocky. And that's all I'll say because I don't want to spoil it. The friendship angle made the book so good for me. Yeah, just, oh, my little heart. And I will say, it's not a spoiler, but I was very pleased by the ending. I genuinely spent the last 100 pages on tenterhooks. I was in fear. I thought, is my heart gonna be broken? I think I got worried it was gonna be like a little bit of a Flowers for Algernon repeat where it's like crushing. And also I read a lot of horror, so I was like, oh, nothing ever fucking good happens in horror. There's like never a happy ending in horror. So I think I was just a bit like tense, but no, I really liked it. I would really recommend reading it. I got on with it really, really well. It was almost perfect for me. So thank you to everyone that's recommended that to me. I feel like I've done the big three of my science recommendations now, like Flowers for Algernon, Dark Matter, and Hail Mary, the trifecta of good recommendations. Yeah, just really, really pleased. Another fucking banger. And you'll be pleased to hear that I have Another banger. I next read another book on my Kindle, and it was Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. This is the first book in the Skyland series, and this is a romance. I've really got some good variety in this month, I think. My reading this month has been very varied, and I think that is the trick of getting out of reading slump, is to not follow a genre with the same genre, to go out of that genre. The book follows Yasmin and Josiah, who are meant to be together forever. They're destined to be together. But when tragedy after tragedy after tragedy strikes their family, they find themselves growing apart. There's a rift that no matter how hard they try, it just cannot be fixed. Love alone, heartbreakingly, isn't enough to save their marriage. Pitch forward a bit, and after Yasmin's life has fallen apart, she's slowly starting to find a little bit of joy in the everyday again. Her and Josiah co-parent successfully, and their business is thriving. They keep finding themselves in these situations where they're drawn together again, and they both individually start to consider that maybe they're not meant to be apart after all. They start to wonder if they are really ready to like call it quits for good. Finally, some good fucking romance. Ooh, okay, so this is a second chance romance. You know, it's not usually my speed. I can find that a bit jarring sometimes, but this is a second chance romance with mature, grown-up characters who are at least in their 30s or 40s. I think they must be late 30s, early 40s, or like mid 30s. I picked this up because it was really highly rated by a BookToker I love, and I thought, why the fuck not? I haven't read a romance in ages, and I've really been wanting to read a romance that's like decent, one that is not devastating, you know, like I love a devastating book, and this is really sad, but like I need a bit of hope. To get into it, this was a standout romance to me for so many reasons, but I will pre-warn you that this is not light and fluffy. It covers some very serious real life topics that I think a lot of people will find really triggering, and it can be very heavy at times, but I feel like the author deals with it in a really sensitive way and in a way that feels realistic. This is basically at its core a story of two people who are meant to be together, but as so many great couples do, get derailed by the things that life throws at them. I think a lot of it is about grief and like the importance of communication, and the emphasis is that like the healing journey is not like a linear journey, you know, like it's not A to B, bad thing happens, person gets better. It's hopeful in the sense that there's a second chance for like both of them, and that healing can be really messy, and that accountability is required from both parties. Like I said earlier, second chance romance isn't really my usual bag. I find it like hard sometimes. I feel like a lot of second chance romance is not done very well, you know. It's kind of like it feeds into that like miscommunication trope, which I so don't often like in like the third act breakup in books. Yeah, I don't know, it's not my speed, and I know a lot of people really like it, but this feels different because to me this read as a second chance romance is not about erasing the past, and it's not necessarily about forgiveness. It's not black and white like that. It has more layers of like accountability and, you know, working on yourself and healing being messy. This one feels more hopeful because it's not about erasing the past, it's about like moving forward together as a couple. Over all of that, because that all sounds really big and heavy, I just love their characters. I love the yearning. I love their crazy chemistry together. Like these two main characters, Yasmin and Josiah, they are convincing me that they are meant to be together. I love that there is this kind of like slight possessiveness, not in a toxic way, but you know, this slight jealousy, this slight possessiveness of two people that have like only been together. I love how their kids are written. They parent really well. The friendships in the book are really good as well. You know me, I love a romance that has like good, well-developed side characters. The cast of characters, the friendships, and like the world feels very well fleshed out. And even though it was a little bit heartbreaking and there are some really sad moments, I felt very immersed in Skyland and their world and their lives and like all of the ancillary stuff that they have going on in their lives. I'm not 100% sure if I'll continue with the Skyland series just because I liked this one so much. I'm like a bit scared to carry on, but from my understanding the Skyland series is like about the other characters. So like Yasmin's best friend Sol will be one of them. Yasmin's best friend Hendrix will be one of them. I imagine probably Josiah's friends will be in them. I need to like do a bit more research, but I am very curious about Sol's book because I hate her husband Edward in this book, so I might read it. If you've read any of them, please let me know. I'd be curious to see how they are and whether I go for the second one. My fourth book read this month was a physical book, and it was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is a fiction book. Boy, oh boy, a lot of you have recommended me this, so let's get into it. Hardback as well. I never read a hardback, but I got this discounted, I think. I got it at 66 books. Vanessa Y was 15 when she became deeply entangled in an affair with her 40-something-year-old professor, Jacob Strain. You'll see why I say affair. Obviously, she's underage, so we all know what that means it is. Anyway, the year is now 2017, and a former student at Jacob Strain's school has accused Jacob Strain of sexual assault and grooming. The student in question has also reached out to Vanessa, knowing that Vanessa has had some similar experiences with him. Now Vanessa is faced with the impossible choice. She can remain silent and continue in her belief that what she had with Jacob Strain was a relationship that she willingly engaged in and was a consenting party to. Or she can speak out and come to terms with the very difficult truth that the man that she was in love with actually spent years grooming and assaulting her. Essentially redefining the events of her past and coming to terms with the fact that her love affair was in fact actually calculated historical years of abuse. A little trigger warning, you might want to skip past this if this is a difficult subject for you, but we are covering a lot in this review, and you've probably gathered by the synopsis that this book is about the long-term abuse of a minor. There is a power dynamic involved. This book explores paedophilia, abuse, long-term trauma and predatory behavior, as well as misogyny and, you know, like the rampant sexism of the media. So if you would like to skip forward on this review, please do. Protect yourself, protect your peace. So yeah, this was a challenging read, and I would implore you to do your thorough research on the trigger warnings ahead of picking this up, even if you feel confident with the read. I want to protect you as viewers and as readers. To explore these themes is incredibly important work, and I know for a fact that this will have been instrumental and so important for so many readers of this, both people that have suffered those events mentioned in the book directly or vicariously, or know someone who's been through anything that even remotely resembles what's covered in here. I know that this book will have been so important for so many people. So with that in mind, my thoughts and my review on this book are in no way synonymous with the way that I view those topics in real life. I haven't really had a negative experience or like negative thoughts reading this book, but I just wanted to make that very, very, very clear. I am discussing my feelings on the book. I am no way discussing my attitude or my thoughts on any of that in real life. So my reading experience of this for me was that it was very much okay, and it wasn't bad, but it was just like good. It wasn't great. It's one of those ones, it's a book that feels really hard to review because of the sensitive nature of the subject. This kind of book is always going to be quite divisive, I think. I do think exploring the themes of a narrator who's in denial about the abuse she suffered and believes that she willingly participated in a relationship with her teacher as a minor. I thought that was a really interesting perspective, and not one that you see often in a lot of these kinds of books. And I think for the most part, it was quite well executed. And you do really feel like you're taken on the journey with Vanessa of like her falling in love, for lack of a better phrase, with this man that is like 30 years older than her. I think it's really well done. And I think for a lot of readers and a lot of people, it will really open their eyes to the fact that abuse for the victim often isn't as black and white as, well, I was abused, this man abused me, and it can be enmeshed with a lot of like really difficult feelings, especially for children and teenagers who, you know, your mind is still developing. It just does a really good job, I feel, of representing the effects of really long-term historical abuse and grooming, and also the impact of that abuse like later in life. Obviously it's deeply affected Vanessa, but we see this 2017 perspective where it's still impacting her relationships now. It's still impacting her career and like her mindset, impacting how she views other survivors of abuse and women. Also discusses a lot about this like awfully pervasive culture of the sexualization of children and young girls and young women. And the discussion of like the Me Too movement, and just quite how fucking cold and callous journalists can be to get their fucking clickbaity article. Sorry for all of the swearing. Lengths people will go to get these clickbait stories that generate hits. The lack of protection for the victims in those stories as well. Like once they tell their story, it's out there, and there is no duty of care to how that is received by the internet, by the world. Chapters where we're like in teenage Vanessa's head are just like so uncomfortable sometimes, and you see how she falls for strain. And I'm not saying that like I would fall for strain too, but the justification of it from a teenage girl's mind, from someone who is kind of like alone and lonely, and how predators target young girls, it's like quite chilling, because as a reader you like know what's happening and you're like impossible powerless to stop it. There is quite a solid chunk of the book that read as quite dull to me. I think it can be shorter, you know, it's what, like it's 369 pages give or take. I think it can be shorter, and I only say that because I think in the middle it becomes quite repetitive. A lot of the middle chunk of the book to me felt like play-by-play scenes of Vanessa and Strain. And when I say scenes, I mean like physically intimate scenes, and I don't mean to say physically intimate or sex in a dismissive way. We should call it what it is. It's rape. But I think that's part of the nuance of the book, right? That in the moment, as a reader, I know it's rape. As a participant and a victim, it's nuanced, isn't it? Let's call it what it is, rape. But anyway, there is play-by-play scenes of that constantly in the middle of the book. I say all that to say I felt like a lot of those scenes might have been too detailed. I know it's meant to be uncomfortable reading, but I did find myself at times questioning the necessity of the frequency of such scenes. But I also think it's really important to sit with the uncomfortable feelings and to not like downplay it for the reader. I don't know, it's a funny one, isn't it? Overall, it's a very hard book for me to review. I expected it to be shocking, but I found myself less shocked than I was thinking I would be. Like I've just been talking about, there are very uncomfortable scenes that I think a lot of people will find incredibly disturbing. I don't know if it's maybe a reflection of how jaded and unsurprised I am when it comes to things like rampant abuse and misogyny and like predatory behaviour. I've read a lot of disturbing things, like both fiction and non-fiction, and like in my previous line of work, I used to work for a women's charity. I was exposed to quite a lot of stuff, and like I'm not unfamiliar with the plight of victims and women. This is not to make me sound like I'm not like other girls, like I read hardcore stuff, because that's not the case, but just to provide some context over my reading experience of the book and maybe why it seems that I am a little less shocked than I was anticipating. It's just to provide a fuller picture on my reading experience, I guess. Despite my lack of shock, I think this is a very important read, and it's a very important story, and I won't say that it wasn't riveting, because I was riveted and I needed to know what happened, but I would not recommend this lightly, because I can fully understand that for the most part, all of us are going to have entirely different reading experiences of this book. And I've seen that, and I've seen a lot of comments about this book already, and you know, the impact that it had on everyone individually as a reader. So yeah, a long and rambly one, and I really hope that I have articulated myself in the way that I was hoping. I hope that you're picking up what I'm putting down. The last book I read for the month, I stupidly was like, oh, I'll write it down later. I'll write down my thoughts later. And I didn't write down my thoughts. And so I'm just going to go off-piste for this one. Yeah, so it might be a bit rambly because I haven't really had a chance to collect my thoughts on it. My last one was a digital book. I read it on Kindle Unlimited. It was available on Kindle Unlimited. Go snag yourself a copy if you like. It is On Wings of Blood by Briar Berlin. And it is a fantasy book, and it is the Bloodwing Academy book #1. Our main character, Medra Pendragon, is half fae. She is supposedly last in the line of dragon riders, and that is what the vampires are telling her. They decide she's worth capturing, and she must now assimilate to their way of life, even though there's no other dragon riders left. So now she's stuck at Bloodwing Academy, which is like an elite school for high blood vampires and Blightborn, which are humans, very select few Blightborn, and she just has to like basically suck it up. Let's introduce to the scene Blake Drakeharrow. Sorry, I'm laughing at the names. I'm laughing at how ridiculous the names are. But anyway, Blake Drakeharrow, high blood vampire, a bit of a douchebag. Somehow, due to some ancient ritual, when they captured poor Medra, they're betrothed. And he's making her life a living hell. Okay. I don't know what compelled me to pick this up, but I am a sucker for like an academic fantasy novel. I love things set in schools. I love things set in academies. It's why I fucking ate up Zodiac Academy, even though it's so bad. I've not read Fourth Wing. I probably won't. This was giving me heavy Harry Potter vibes, heavy Zodiac Academy vibes, heavy House of Night vibes. If anyone ever read House of Night when they were younger, that's another vampiric academy school kind of energy. Aged very badly though, a lot of slurs in it. Anyway, we're not talking about that. So yeah, that's kind of the energy I got from this. I saw Vampiric Academy and thought, hell yeah, brother. This is one of those cases where I think enjoyment up high, writing down low. This was like a reality TV of a book for me. If you can look past a lot of that, you might be fine. It's also an unfinished series, which I think is worth mentioning. I read the second one. It's not in this month's video, but it'll be in next month's video. I've read the second one and now I have to wait till like spring 2026 for the third, which is kind of something I hate doing because I just forget a lot of shit, you know. I enjoyed reading it. It was a fun experience. I like an academic book. I like houses. I like, you know, a bit of bullying, a bit of school bullying. I hate it in reality. So yeah, when I say the Zodiac Academy comparison, there is some bullying in it. From her trigger warning section at the beginning, I honestly thought it was going to be much worse than Zodiac Academy. I will stop talking about Zodiac Academy in a second, but I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't as bad because the bullying in Zodiac Academy was a hard read. It was a hard read. This moves a lot faster than that. There is some bullying. It was quite contrived at points. So you know when you get dropped into like a new fantasy book, there's obviously a certain element of like world building and lore and magical systems that the reader needs to be given, get the knowledge about, established. I won't lie and say that an academic setting with someone who is not of that world is quite a good way to do it because, you know, they don't know as much as we don't know. But there was a lot of paragraphs that I was reading that I was like, oh, that's very fucking convenient, isn't it? That they were just like, what, you don't know about this? And then they would launch into like a 3-page spiel explaining the magic system. And in my head, I'm like, that's not how a conversation works. It felt contrived in the sense that all of these very important big conversations that you had questions about as a reader would just like conveniently happen between this guy that hates your guts will now take his time to explain the high blood magic system to you, or like, or what do you mean this girl that you've just randomly met is taking the time to explain the social economic status of blight-born humans versus high blood vampires. It just felt a bit too like convenient. That's what took me out of the reading experience a bit. But obviously that is world building. This book just felt like a very world building book for at least the first half, which makes sense. That sounds really rude, but the way it was done was just a smidge clunky. But other than that, I really liked it. Thought it was a good brainless read. I haven't stayed up reading till like 2 a.m. in a really long time, and this is what happens to me with fantasy books. I can't just ever fucking sit and enjoy them. I'm like, I need to know what happens. Dare I say it? I'm like open to a blonde, I can't say it. I'm open to a blonde love interest. He's like a little bit Draco Malfoy coded. I think Manacled turned the turntables for me in terms of accepting a blonde male love interest. Because one thing I've always said is blonde is for women and children. I can't take a blonde man seriously. I usually prefer like dark haired characters. I don't like a pale wafy blonde. All the high blood vampires in this are a shade of blonde, but I do think a little Draco Malfoy coded like blonde bully. Go on then. And do you know who I do like in it? Florence Shen. This is why it's so like Hogwarts adjacent. Florence Shen is just like a dead spit of Hermione Granger. Like, what do you mean? Like nerdy human best friend? Like really academically gifted. Very easy for me to sit and draw other comparisons, but I did really like her character. I thought she was a really lovely, like warm, well-rounded, like I loved her. Like, you know, she's just that little bit of wholesomeness that the book needs. I think Medra is a bit rash, but you know, you would be too if you'd been dumped in that situation. There is also trials in it. And you know what I mean? That's just like my perfect trifecta. I don't think it's the best book you'll ever read. If anything, if you read it and hate it as a result of this review, don't come to me, don't tell me about it. Like I feel bad, but it was a good bit of enjoyment. It was fun. I liked it. My thoughts on the second, I want to tell you right now, but I didn't finish it in May, so I can't. I do think that the author probably has attempted to cram all of her fantasy tropes, her favorite ones, into one novel, because we've got vampires, we've got dragons, we've got fae, we've got like a dark academia setting, we have trials and tribulations in there, we have kind of like forced marriage or betrothal. We've got like villain gets the girl, villain like morally grey kind of energy. It was okay, like it was good. My critical brain is like at odds with my fun-loving brain here, because her whining does get annoying. Like every single time I remember something good, I remember something bad about it. But I think for the most part, what's skewed me here is the fact that I literally like devoured it. There was no time for me to sit and think like, was this good? Am I enjoying this? I don't read a lot of fantasy anymore. Because of my high DNF rate, because of just the saturation of it all. So I think to have a fantasy book that feels a little bit more memorable to me is just an achievement in and of itself. And to have a fantasy book that wasn't just like sex scene upon sex scene upon sex scene is also like a reason I was DNFing a lot of them. I love me a good smut scene. When the book is just the author wanted to write a smut book and just added in some fantasy plot around it, that to me is a bit boring now. But yeah, I don't know, that's a very mixed review. I don't really know where I stand on that. It was immersive for sure. I would probably say that if fantasy is your main source of reading, you would probably enjoy this. I basically read the whole thing in one sitting, which is a really long time since I've done that. I stayed up really late, and then I read the second one and I tried to slow it down, and now I have to wait till March 2026, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, that was my May reading wrap up. Let's talk books in the comments, let's talk discussions. Thank you everyone for all your love on my latest like bookish videos, because guess what, I really enjoy filming them. If I could film bookish vlogs all the time, I would. Maybe I'll film another, who knows? But yeah, thank you so much. I do have a bookish vlog up on my channel that's been posted recently, so go check that out if you haven't already. As always, recommend me books in the comments. Let's talk books, because you all give me such fantastic recommendations, and I can't promise I'll read them instantly, but I will add them to my TBR. And I love to talk about books with you. So yeah, thanks so much. I have my story graph in the description box, which you can follow if you want. I have a book talk page. I'm not posting on that much, but I do try post on there. I have my regular TikTok, and then I have my Instagram, which has a book highlights for all the books I'm reading this year. And whenever I start a new book, I try post it on my story, so you can kind of see what I'm reading at the same time, like live and direct. You don't have to wait for these videos. But yeah, if you liked today's video, feel free to leave a little like or a subscribe or a comment. As always, I really appreciate your support. I upload every Sunday and every other Wednesday, and I'll see you on the next video.